You go ahead and marry my husband." The entire chapel froze. All eyes turned toward the entrance, where Kiera Amari stood, radiant, composed. The bride, Taylor Monroe, turned pale. Whispers erupted. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Just moments ago, guests were sipping champagne, expecting vows of eternal love between Taylor and Ryan Whitmore. But no one anticipated the explosive arrival of the woman they betrayed. What happened next would leave everyone breathless. Was Kiera here to ruin the wedding or reveal a deeper truth? If you're watching this, tell us, where are you tuning in from, and what do you think Kiera's next move will be? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the full story and more jaw-dropping moments like this. What would you do if your best friend stole your fiancé and tried to bury the truth? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. Kiera Amari sat in the dimly lit doctor's office, the steady tick of the clock drilling into her skull like a countdown to oblivion. Her palms were clammy, and the sterile scent of antiseptic made her stomach churn. The oncologist's words were clinical, almost mechanical. Advanced gastric cancer, aggressive progression, limited treatment response. She heard everything and nothing at once. Her world shrank to the heartbeat pounding in her ears, and the haunting realization that time, her most faithful ally, had just turned its back on her. She left the clinic with a tremor in her step, but a strange, smoldering clarity in her eyes. Death might be approaching, but Kiera wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Back in the apartment she shared with Ryan Whitmore, her longtime boyfriend, the atmosphere was too perfect, too staged, like a set waiting for the curtain to rise on a scene she hadn't agreed to. His cologne lingered even though he wasn't home, and on the kitchen counter sat a bouquet of roses she hadn't received. Suspicion fluttered inside her like a moth against glass, faint but relentless. Kiera wasn't paranoid, just attentive. It was a survival instinct sharpened by betrayal too many times ignored. That night, when she checked Ryan's messages, something she hadn't done in years, she found it. The truth wasn't buried deep. It was there in the open, dressed in smug emojis and midnight rendezvous. He was cheating. Worse, it was with the one person she had sworn to protect like a sister. Taylor Monroe, blonde, bright, built to charm a room before she even spoke. She had been Kiera's best friend since college. The kind of friend who cried with you, drank with you, and claimed she'd die for you. Now she was plotting to kill for you, too. Kiera stumbled onto a voice message, buried among Ryan's saved recordings, probably forgotten or simply underestimated. Taylor's voice slithered through the speaker. "She's already dying, Rye. The insurance policy is a gift from the universe. We just push a little." The words struck Kiera like cold steel. This wasn't betrayal, it was premeditation. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She listened again and again until the venom in Taylor's voice became a familiar lullaby. Then she stood, walked to the mirror, and looked at herself. Not at the illness, not at the fatigue, but at the fire that refused to die. "They want me gone," she whispered, tracing the edge of her jaw like armor. "But I'm still here." That night, Kiera didn't sleep. She studied Ryan's financial files, memorized passwords, and quietly removed her name from anything that could be twisted into a noose. She called her lawyer. She packed a single bag. She didn't leave a note. By morning, she was standing in the lobby of Westwood Global Enterprises, clutching a portfolio of experience, strategy, and quiet rage. She had met Leonard Westwood once, at a high school debate tournament where he had watched her win state with fire in her voice and grace in her smile. He had been a shy, sharp boy then. Now he was one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, and the rumors about his brilliance were rivaled only by whispers of his heartache. Kiera wasn't there for nostalgia. She was there to align herself with someone who knew how to win without leaving blood on the floor. Leonard didn't recognize her at first, not behind the tailored suit and the glacier-cool poise. But when he did, he smiled like someone who had just seen sunlight after a long storm. "Kiera Amari?" he said, and she nodded with the calm of a woman who had nothing left to lose. She didn't tell him everything, not yet, but she told him enough. She was looking for a new beginning. She had ideas. She had loyalty, if placed correctly. and she was ready to go to war for the right mission. Leonard didn't need convincing. He saw the storm behind her eyes and recognized it because it had once lived in his. That afternoon, as she walked into her new office, bare, white, impersonal, Kiera sat down and exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. The cancer hadn't left, but now it had company, strategy. She opened her laptop, created encrypted folders, and began mapping every lie Ryan had told her, every asset he had hidden, every scheme Taylor had whispered into his ear. She didn't fantasize about revenge. She planned for it, meticulously, coldly, like a chess player 3 moves from checkmate. There would be no explosion, no scandal, just exposure. They had buried her in advance, but Kiera was still breathing, and now she was watching. Late that night, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number read, "You didn't show up to dinner. Hope you're okay." It was from Ryan, no doubt expecting Kiera to slither back like a woman in denial. She smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. She typed back, "Don't wait up." Then she turned off the phone. Somewhere in the distance, thunder cracked, but inside Kiera Amari, a storm was already raging. Kiera Amari returned to the office one final time, not to reclaim her desk or gather her belongings, but to sever ties cleanly, without the noise of confrontation or the luxury of goodbyes. The morning sun slanted through the glass-paneled walls of Whitmore Consulting like a spotlight, casting long shadows across floors too polished, too perfect, like everything else Ryan Whitmore had curated. He wasn't there yet, of course. He never arrived before 10 unless there was press. Taylor Monroe's laughter echoed from the break room, sharp, familiar, and now tainted with venom. Kiera walked past it without a flicker. She no longer belonged to this space, but before she left, she would leave a trace they couldn't erase. She entered Ryan's office with a badge that still worked, surprising but not for long, and slid a manila envelope onto his desk. Inside were copies of joint account closures, apartment lease terminations, and a concise, emotionless letter voiding her signature from the insurance policy he had tried to weaponize. Beneath the envelope, she placed a single photo, one from their 5th anniversary, taken in Greece, where her smile had been real, but his eyes had wandered toward someone else. It wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. She wanted him to see what he'd destroyed when he reached for more than he deserved. Outside the building, the city pulsed with motion, uncaring and relentless, just the way Kiera needed it. She walked without aim at first, letting her heels beat against the pavement until the sound became a rhythm steadier than her heartbeat. She didn't feel free, not yet, but she was no longer caged. That was enough. A cafe window caught her reflection. Elegant trench coat, calm face, eyes dark with clarity. She barely recognized the woman staring back, and she liked that. Reinvention wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a living thing, breathing beneath her skin. Later that day, Kiera stepped into the high-rise of Westwood Global Enterprises, where the lobby was vast and modern, all steel and silence. She had an appointment, one scheduled without fanfare, facilitated by a quiet call from Leonard Westwood's assistant, who had recognized her name immediately. Leonard had built an empire, not by being loud, but by being precise, and Kiera respected that more than she could explain. She adjusted her collar, steeled her shoulders, and stepped into the private elevator reserved for executive guests. It rose in smooth silence, like a secret too powerful to speak aloud. Leonard's office was framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, bright, indifferent, full of opportunity and ruin. He stood when she entered, tall and lean, with golden hair swept back and a presence that filled the room without effort. His eyes, ocean gray, widened in warm recognition. "Kiera Amari," he said, not as a question but a welcome, like he had been waiting. She didn't smile. "I need something new," she said, her voice even but taut with truth. "Not a favor. A place to stand again." Leonard studied her in silence for a moment, then motioned to the chair opposite his. "Then let's build it." Their conversation was business, direct, surgical, unburdened by their high school past. Kiera explained her vision, a restructuring strategy that could reduce operational drag by 30%, increase cross-departmental efficiency, and rebuild a fractured internal culture. tools she had honed working under Ryan, ironically. Leonard listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded once, decisively. You'll start as strategic operations advisor. Temporary contract, full autonomy. You answer only to me. It wasn't a gift, it was a test, and Kiera knew how to pass it. The following week blurred into 12-hour workdays, sleepless nights, and quiet bursts of progress. Kiera worked from a minimalist office 3 floors below Leonard's, outfitted only with a desk, 2 monitors, and an espresso machine that ran like a dream. She built models, drafted reports, and untangled chaos left behind by executives who thrived on disorganization. She didn't think about Ryan. She didn't mention Taylor. Her mind was sharp, unflinching, like a blade honed on pain and purpose. At night, she read investment case studies instead of cancer blogs, learned technical analysis instead of tracking her prognosis. If her time was limited, then every minute would matter. Leonard visited often, not intrusively, but with curiosity cloaked in professionalism. Sometimes he brought insights from other departments. Sometimes he brought coffee. Once, he stood silently behind her while she presented a model to 3 VPs and waited until they left to say, "You command a room better than I ever did." Kiera raised an eyebrow and responded dryly, "You built the room. I'm just rearranging the furniture." It wasn't flirtation, not yet, but something had shifted, an alignment, a shared understanding forged in fire and rebuilt from ruin. On a Friday evening, long after the offices had emptied, Kiera stood at the window of her new space, watching the lights of the city blink like signals from another life. She thought of the woman she used to be, hopeful, naive, slow to recognize malice when it smiled. That version of her had died the day she heard Taylor's voice on Ryan's recorder. What remained was a strategist, a survivor, a woman who no longer asked for permission to exist. Behind her, Leonard's voice broke the quiet. "You stayed late." She didn't turn. "So did you." He stepped beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "You're not just cutting ties," he said softly. "You're rebuilding yourself." Kiera nodded. "Because they thought I wouldn't make it this far." And just like that, without rage or ceremony, Kiera Amari began again. Not as the woman betrayed, but as the woman they never saw coming. Kiera Amari didn't believe in revenge for the sake of fire. It had to be precise, strategic, earned. Fire burns fast. She wanted erosion, the kind that crumbled a foundation from within while the facade still smiled at the world. In the weeks following her return to the corporate battlefield, she mapped every thread of Ryan Whitmore's professional life. Each false deal he pitched, each budget he quietly manipulated, each favor traded behind closed doors. His mistakes weren't hidden, they were just disguised as ambition. She knew how he moved, how he lied, how he spun charm into silence. He had taught her well, too well. By day, Kiera worked tirelessly under Leonard's trust, shaping policies that began cleaning the internal rot of Westwood Global Enterprises. By night, she became a shadow haunting the digital corridors of Whitmore Consulting, tracing old communications, decrypting files she had quietly copied before leaving. What she uncovered wasn't just betrayal, it was illegal. Misappropriated funds, falsified invoices, and NDA violations. She didn't move quickly. That would tip her hand. She built a case, layer by layer, so comprehensive that when it landed, it would be impossible to dismiss as a personal vendetta. One evening, while reviewing archive footage from a company retreat she had skipped due to illness, Kiera froze the frame on Taylor Monroe's face, grinning, drink in hand, perched too close to Ryan for coincidence. Her best friend had slid into her life like silk and coiled around her trust like a snake. But the retreat footage offered more than just betrayal. It offered faces, timestamps, conversations captured in the background that confirmed relationships long denied, and backroom deals made while Kiera was fighting nausea and fatigue in silence. She clipped the footage, encrypted it, and stored it on an external drive labeled simply War. While Kiera laid the groundwork, she also built her fortress. She opened a brokerage account under a new entity name, funneled a portion of her salary into aggressive tech stocks, and took Leonard's offhand suggestion about blockchain investments and ran with it. Every dollar became a brick in the wall between her and dependency. She read market trends like war maps, not just to grow wealth, but to understand the language Ryan and Taylor had tried to weaponize against her. She wouldn't just survive, she would thrive in the terrain they thought she couldn't navigate. But money was only part of the arsenal. Influence, she learned, was quieter but far more powerful. Kiera began mentoring junior analysts at Westwood, building quiet alliances through sincerity and example. She gained a reputation for listening without condescension and leading without threat. People began echoing her ideas in executive meetings before they knew they were hers. Her presence was no longer questioned, it was expected. Leonard watched the transformation with something between awe and relief. He once told her, in a hallway dimmed by late hours, "You don't need a seat at the table, Kiera. You are the table." The first public strike came through a corporate blog, a well-timed guest article Kiera authored under a pen name, dissecting unethical hiring practices that bore an eerie resemblance to Whitmore Consulting's internal policies. It went viral within the industry, triggering discussions across LinkedIn boards and HR circles. Though no names were mentioned, those who knew the players read between every line. Ryan tried to dismiss it as noise, but several of his partners began questioning expense reports and renegotiating contracts. Taylor, on the other hand, responded with a post of her own, a sugary message about uplifting women in leadership that felt more like a smokescreen than sincerity. Kiera didn't respond. Not yet. Then came the internal leak. An anonymous email was sent to Whitmore Consulting's board, including detailed evidence of Ryan's misuse of client funds and Taylor's manipulation of HR protocols to cover for him. No accusations, just facts, perfectly sourced and chronologically irrefutable. Panic spread like ink in water. Kiera didn't need to witness it to know how Ryan would react, with denial, then arrogance, then desperation. She had lived through those stages before. Now she controlled the timing. During this quiet chaos, Leonard remained her anchor. He didn't ask for specifics, didn't press when she declined a dinner invitation, or appeared in the office with dark circles beneath her eyes that rarely blinked anymore. Instead, he offered her space and resources, a security consultant, legal guidance, and a data analyst who owed him a favor. She didn't accept all of it, but she appreciated the offer. Leonard wasn't trying to control her. He was standing behind her back, ready if she fell. And for the first time in a long time, Kiera felt what it was like to move forward without needing to look behind her. One night, long after most of the city had gone to sleep, Kiera stared at a screen filled with open windows, stock dashboards, legal memos, chat logs, email threads. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated sending one final file, a confidential recording from an internal company dinner where Ryan joked too loudly and too clearly about burying problems in paperwork. She didn't need to send it yet, but it was there, waiting. She smiled, not with malice, but with certainty. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. Kiera closed her laptop, stood in the darkened room, and walked to the window. Below, the city blinked with secrets and possibilities. She didn't whisper vows or curse names. She just stood there, the storm inside her finally finding direction. They had underestimated her silence, but silence was never surrender. It was strategy. And tomorrow the next piece would fall. The invitation had been sitting on Kiera Amari's desk for over a week, embossed in gold foil and tied with a pale satin ribbon, fancy, smug, and desperate to impress. It was for the 20-year high school reunion, hosted at a private estate just outside the city, complete with a cocktail hour, catered dinner, and live jazz. Kiera hadn't planned to attend. Reunions were breeding grounds for empty nostalgia and subtle status contests, both of which she had outgrown. But when her assistant casually mentioned that Ryan Whitmore and Taylor Monroe had RSVP'd as Mr. and future Mrs., Kiera's decision solidified with quiet finality. If they wanted to parade the fiction of a happy engagement, she would let them, but not unchallenged. She arrived 30 minutes late, deliberately so. The venue was already humming with laughter and clinking glasses, old classmates forming circles of polite bragging and carefully filtered stories. As she stepped through the main entrance, every conversation seemed to falter, eyes drawn toward her like iron filings to a magnet. Kiera's gown was deep emerald satin, sculpted to her body like it had been poured onto her. Her hair was swept into a sleek chignon, exposing the length of her neck, where a single diamond glinted under the chandelier light. But it wasn't just the look. It was the air around her, cool and unbothered, that made people stare. She wasn't the Kiera they remembered. She was something far more dangerous. Ryan saw her first. His smile faltered before he caught himself, adjusting the lapels of his suit and reaching for Taylor's hand as if needing an anchor. Taylor, radiant in blush pink and champagne curls, turned and froze. Her expression tried to hold, but the panic seeped through in the tightness around her mouth. Kiera offered a polite smile, the kind that invited curiosity but discouraged closeness. She greeted a few former classmates, answering questions about her work with smooth detachment, never once mentioning names, alluding to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The evening shifted when the MC announced a brief segment, Recognition for Alumni Successes. Taylor, of course, had arranged to be acknowledged for launching her boutique PR firm, a venture padded with Ryan's money and hollow marketing promises. She stepped onto the platform, falsely humble, clutching the mic like a lifeline. As she spoke about uplifting women and learning from sisterhood, Kiera's smile sharpened. The hypocrisy was too thick, and the audience, mostly unaware of the cracks in the story, nodded along, enchanted by the performance. Then it was Kiera's turn. She hadn't asked to be included, but the organizing committee had insisted when they realized she was attending. She walked to the front slowly, the train of her gown whispering secrets across the floor. She didn't speak of titles or achievements. Instead, she shared a brief story about resilience. A woman once brought low by illness, betrayal, and loss, who chose not to drown, but to transform. Her voice didn't waver. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the very ones who sharpen the knife behind your back, she said, her gaze drifting deliberately to Taylor. But survival isn't about avoiding pain. It's about turning it into power. The applause was immediate, not polite but real. Even those who didn't know the full story felt the weight of her words. Taylor's smile had vanished completely, and Ryan stared at his drink like it could transport him elsewhere. After the speeches, people swarmed Kiera, curious, inspired, eager to reconnect. Taylor tried to reassert herself by flashing a glittering engagement ring, but the moment had already shifted. She wasn't the star anymore. The room, the narrative, the power, none of it belonged to her now. Near the bar, an old friend approached Kiera with wide eyes and a breathless laugh. "I didn't even recognize you," she said. "You're like royalty." Kiera thanked her with grace but didn't linger. She moved through the room like someone who knew exactly where she stood, and more importantly, how far she'd come. She overheard murmurs. Wasn't she with Ryan before? Didn't Taylor used to live with her? Didn't they all seem close? Seeds of doubt began to take root, and Kiera didn't have to water them. The truth would blossom all on its own. As the night wound down, Ryan cornered her near the restroom hallway, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing here, Kiera?" he hissed, the polished mask slipping just enough to reveal the man beneath. Kiera tilted her head, calm as still water. "You invited me, remember?" she replied. "Or was that only because you thought I'd stay buried?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Taylor arrived seconds later, clutching his arm, eyes flicking between them. "You've made your point," she said, brittle as glass. "Have I?" Kiera murmured. "I was just getting started." Outside, as the valet brought around her car, Leonard Westwood's voice buzzed through her phone. "How did it go?" he asked, not needing details but savoring the tone in her voice. "Let's just say," Kiera answered, stepping into the black sedan, "they remembered who I was and who I've become." Then she ended the call, rolled down the window, and let the cool night wind sweep across her face. She had entered that reunion as a specter from their past, but she was leaving as something else entirely. A woman reborn in the fire they lit to destroy her. And they had no idea what was coming next. Jealousy has a scent, sharp, acidic, and unmistakable. And Ryan Whitmore wore it like cologne. Ever since the reunion, where Kiera Amari had stolen the spotlight without even trying, he had become volatile in ways Taylor Monroe had not anticipated. She noticed the change first in how often he checked his phone, how tightly he gripped his glass during dinner parties, and how he suddenly became obsessed with Kiera's LinkedIn activity, even though he pretended not to care. Taylor, perceptive when it suited her, began to see the cracks. She knew Ryan better than anyone, and what she saw now wasn't longing, it was obsession. Kiera had returned not as a wounded ex, but as a force of nature, and Ryan, once the architect of her downfall, now stood on the trembling floorboards of his collapse. Kiera knew he was watching her. She didn't need confirmation from her private investigator or the digital pings of anonymous views on her online profiles. She could feel it in how often she accidentally ran into former colleagues now employed at Westwood, how rumors of her success began to circulate in hushed tones, laced with disbelief. She welcomed it. Let him watch. Let him stew in the knowledge that she was flourishing in a world that didn't include him. But Kiera didn't stop there. She understood that revenge wasn't about ego. It was about strategy, about leveraging the weight of perception until the person who tried to bury you ends up digging their own grave. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. A joint conference between Westwood and several external consultants was scheduled to take place. Ryan's firm among the invitees. It was a closed-door event, invitation only, hosted at one of the city's elite business forums. Kiera didn't hesitate to add herself to the panel as a speaker. Leonard Westwood backed her fully, knowing the implications and respecting her poise. The message wasn't subtle, nor was it meant to be. When Ryan received the program and saw her name in bold next to the keynote title, his hands trembled. Taylor tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but Ryan knew better. Kiera was orchestrating something, and he was standing directly in the center of her stage. The morning of the event, Kiera dressed like a woman going to war. Her suit was tailored to perfection, deep navy with sharp lines and subtle gold accents. She wore her confidence like armor, and when she stepped onto the panel stage, she didn't just own the room, she redefined it. Ryan sat in the second row, stiff and pale, flanked by Taylor, who looked like she had swallowed acid. Kiera delivered her presentation with grace and precision, subtly embedding references to ethical failure, the importance of integrity and leadership, and the dangers of personal greed masked as innovation. She never said Ryan's name, but everyone in the room could read the subtext painted between every polished word. After the session, Kiera moved through the crowd like a queen holding court. She smiled, exchanged cards, and made promises to follow up on potential partnerships. When Ryan approached her, jaw set, she didn't blink. "Impressive speech," he said through gritted teeth. "Glad you liked it," she replied, her tone smooth as velvet. Taylor joined a moment later, her expression strained. "You've really reinvented yourself," she offered, the praise hollow. Kiera nodded. "I didn't reinvent, I reclaimed." Then she walked away before they could respond, leaving them standing in a silence that roared with humiliation. But Kiera wasn't done. She had prepared a dossier, one carefully curated to fall into the hands of an investigative journalist attending the conference. It contained details of questionable financial moves made by Ryan's firm over the last fiscal year, none of which could be traced back to her, but all of which pointed toward potential legal and ethical violations. Within a week, an expose appeared online, raising questions about Whitmore Consulting's practices. Ryan denied the allegations publicly, but the damage was already spreading. Several clients paused their contracts, citing concerns. Investors began to whisper. Internally, the pressure mounted. Meanwhile, Taylor's panic metastasized into paranoia. She accused Ryan of withholding information, of being sloppy, of dragging her into something she didn't agree to. He retaliated by accusing her of leaking the documents, unable to fathom that the woman they had once conspired against was now 3 steps ahead. Their partnership, built on betrayal, began to fracture under the weight of accountability. Kiera watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with the measured calm of someone witnessing justice take root. Amidst the storm, Leonard pulled Kiera aside during a board meeting. "You've been precise," he said, his voice low. "Controlled. I just need to know, how far are you willing to take this?" Kiera looked at him, her gaze steady. "Far enough to make sure they never try to destroy another woman like they tried with me." Leonard didn't press further. He understood. He had once fought his own battles with fire, and he respected those who knew when to wield it and when to let it burn. That night, Kiera stood on her balcony, city lights stretching beneath her like a map of every choice she had made. She had exposed Ryan, destabilized Taylor, and built a fortress of her success without ever lowering herself to the level they had once dragged her to. But she wasn't gloating. She was focused. Because revenge wasn't an endpoint. It was only a checkpoint on the way to something greater. And the next move would be the one that shifted everything. The ceremony was set in a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the bay, where white roses bloomed in every corner and silk ribbons curled around gold-edged chairs. Guests murmured with anticipation, sipping champagne and commenting on the lavish details that only money and desperation could buy. Ryan Whitmore stood at the altar in a custom-tailored tuxedo, his smile stretched tight across his face like freshly pressed linen, while Taylor Monroe paced behind a curtain, gripping her bouquet so tightly that her knuckles blanched. Everything had been timed perfectly, from the harpist's opening notes to the release of doves after the kiss. What they hadn't accounted for was the door opening before the bride could even make her entrance. Kiera Amari stepped inside without apology, dressed not in vengeance, but in elegance, an ivory sheath gown that flowed like water and heels that echoed through the marble floor with deliberate rhythm. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The officiant faltered. Ryan's face paled before flushing crimson, and Taylor, half a step from stepping into view, froze like prey caught in a hunter's breath. Kiera walked down the aisle not with fury, but with something far more dangerous, composure sharpened to a blade. She reached the halfway point, turned to the audience, and spoke with a voice that cut through the luxury like thunder through silk. "You go ahead and marry my man." The room gasped. A grandmother clutched her pearls. Someone knocked over a glass. But Kiera didn't flinch. She turned slowly toward Ryan, her gaze unblinking. "That is, if you're all comfortable watching a wedding built on insurance fraud, infidelity, and an attempted murder plot." The silence that followed was deafening. Taylor stumbled into view, bouquet dropping with a soft thud as she tried to speak. But Kiera raised one hand, and the room obeyed her more than it did the officiant. "You don't get to speak just yet, sweetheart. Not until they've seen what you whispered in his ear the night you decided I was better off dead." From her handbag, Kiera pulled out a small remote and clicked it. The projection screen, meant to display a slideshow of romantic photos, lit up behind the altar. But instead of beach kisses and engagement parties, it played a short audio clip. Taylor's voice filled the room, crackling but clear. "She's already dying, Rye. The insurance policy is a gift from the universe. We just push a little." Gasps erupted, followed by murmurs, then shouted questions. Taylor lunged forward, trying to unplug the device, but it was too late. Kiera had pressed a stop, but the damage was already stitched into the air, like permanent ink. Ryan stepped toward her, hands up as if trying to frame a lie quickly enough to defuse the bomb. Kiera didn't back away. She held his eyes with the same quiet force she had found in herself months ago. "Do you know what it feels like to stare at death and still choose to live?" she asked. "Because I do. And I chose to live long enough to destroy this farce of a fantasy you both built on my grave." Taylor tried to defend herself, babbling about context, manipulation, and how it wasn't what it seemed. But the guests were already whispering, cameras were already recording, and Kiera had already turned to leave. She didn't rush. She walked down the aisle the same way she'd come, each step a punctuation mark in the sentence of her survival. Outside the ballroom, Leonard Westwood leaned against a black sedan, hands in his pockets, watching with something between admiration and awe. He opened the door without a word. She slid in beside him, exhaling as the glass tinted behind them, closing out the chaos. He glanced over. "You didn't burn it down," he said. "Not completely." Kiera smiled without humor. "No," she replied, "but I made sure they lit the match themselves." Back inside, the wedding unraveled in real time. Some guests left immediately, uncomfortable with the scent of scandal. Others stayed, circling Ryan and Taylor with questions, not sympathy. The officiant quietly exited through a side door. The band packed up without playing a single note. Taylor screamed at Ryan, Ryan screamed back, and amid the chaos, the illusion collapsed. Because while they had plotted Kiera's end, they had never planned for her resurrection. The next morning, the tabloids swarmed with headlines. Runaway wedding turns into scandal of the year. CEO's ex exposes shocking betrayal at the altar. Audio evidence leaks as wedding guests demand refunds. Ryan issued a statement, filled with half-denials and legal jargon. Taylor vanished from social media, her PR firm's website quietly going dark. Meanwhile, Kiera declined interviews, refused to comment, and simply returned to work, where her office door bore a fresh plaque and her inbox overflowed with new opportunities. Leonard greeted her with a quiet nod, offering a coffee he had brewed himself. "You did it," he said. Kiera took the cup, inhaling the scent before responding. "No," she said. "I just reminded them who I am. The truth, after all, doesn't need permission to speak. It only needs a stage, and I gave it one." Then she turned to her desk, opened her laptop, and began again. Because revenge was done, but power was only just beginning. Kiera Amari had learned long ago that some people do not crumble when exposed. They adapt, dig deeper, and double down. After the chaos of the ruined wedding, she expected Taylor Monroe to vanish under the weight of disgrace, but she should have known better. Taylor didn't retreat, she regrouped, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The woman who had once clung to Kiera's arm in college hallways was now a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. And cornered people lash out, not with shame, but with bloodlust. It started with silence. No public retaliation, no statements, not even a whisper. That silence, Kiera knew, wasn't surrender. It was a plan. And soon, small things began to shift. Her car alarm triggered without reason 3 nights in a row. A man loitered across from her building, pretending to be on a call, but glancing up at her window every few minutes. Her apartment door was found ajar one evening, though the deadbolt had been engaged. Nothing stolen, nothing out of place, just enough to rattle the bones. She reported everything, of course, and installed extra security, but instinct told her this wasn't random. Taylor was still playing the game, only now the rules were darker. Leonard Westwood noticed first how her shoulders tensed in meetings, how her answers became clipped, and how she now locked her office door even during the day. One night after hours, he found her alone, reviewing CCTV footage from the building's garage. He didn't speak until she looked up. "They've escalated," she said simply, "and I don't plan to wait until it's my blood on the pavement." Leonard nodded once and walked out without a word. The next morning, Kiera was introduced to a man named Miles. Quiet, ex-military, now head of discreet executive security. He was assigned to her without question, and from that moment forward, she was never truly alone. But Taylor was clever. She didn't go through the front door. She went through a man named Brandon Lee, a freelance hacker, known in certain circles for selling access to confidential networks. He'd once been blacklisted for breaching a pharmaceutical company's data vault. Now he had a new employer and a new target. He infiltrated Kiera's private files, attempting to clone her devices and trace her schedule. What he didn't know was that Leonard had prepared for this. Kiera's system flagged the intrusion within hours, and within days, Miles tracked the source back to Taylor's rented condo downtown. Kiera didn't call the police. Not yet. She needed more. Surveillance was deployed, calls were traced, and Brandon was followed to a meeting in a cafe 3 blocks from Taylor's office. Photos captured the exchange, cash for flash drives, whispers for orders. Still, Kiera waited, because if she moved too soon, Taylor would slip through the cracks with a tearful apology and an expensive lawyer. Kiera had done her homework. She knew how to build a case that stuck like tar. Then came the final straw. One evening, as she crossed the underground parking garage toward her car, the lights flickered and went black. For a moment, the silence was total. Then footsteps, fast, intentional. Miles emerged from the shadows just seconds before the man reached her, tackling the would-be assailant to the concrete in one fluid motion. He disarmed him quickly, a pocket knife, thin and clean, and pinned him down until the police arrived. The man refused to speak, but they found a burner phone in his pocket. On it, a single message: "Finish the job." Taylor's name wasn't on the phone, but the trail wasn't hard to follow anymore. Brandon cracked under pressure, flipping within 24 hours and handing over audio files that proved he had been hired by Taylor to gather intel, track Kiera's movement, and create a moment of vulnerability. The phrasing was clinical, chilling. Evidence, motive, payment records. It was all airtight. Kiera delivered it personally to the authorities, along with footage from the garage and Brandon's signed testimony. And this time, they didn't hesitate. Taylor Monroe was arrested at her condo in the middle of a photo shoot, still in full makeup, the cuffs snapping around her wrists before she had time to scream. The story broke within hours. PR queen behind bars, attempted murder, plot foiled. It spread like wildfire, with images of Taylor being let out in tears and commentary dissecting every part of her downfall. Ryan Whitmore, though not formally charged, was implicated by association and dropped from 2 advisory boards within a week. He tried to call Kiera. She didn't answer. His voice belonged to a different life, one she had buried with every insult, every lie, every sleepless night, wondering if she'd imagined the betrayal. Leonard took her out to dinner that evening, not to celebrate, but to breathe. Over grilled sea bass and dry Riesling, he watched her with quiet reverence. "You've been fighting so long," he said. "You've forgotten how to be still." Kiera looked out over the city lights, the weight of survival finally softening into something that felt like peace. "I wasn't fighting to stay alive," she said. "I was fighting to matter again." Leonard raised his glass. "You always mattered. They just couldn't see it. Now the world has no choice but to watch." Back in her apartment that night, Kiera stood barefoot near the window, the skyline glittering like a city made of glass. She no longer felt hunted, no longer felt rage crackling beneath her skin. What she felt now was colder, quieter, and far more powerful. Justice, not revenge, not victory, but justice, and it had finally arrived. The morning sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kiera Amari's office, bathing the space in a soft, golden glow that made the polished stone floors shimmer like liquid gold. She stood with her back to the view, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of jasmine tea, eyes closed as she listened to the distant hum of the city below. It had been weeks since Taylor Monroe's arrest, and the world had moved on, as it always does, chasing fresher scandals and newer flames. But for Kiera, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. The chaos had receded, and what remained was hers alone to shape. Ryan Whitmore had all but disappeared from public view. He resigned from Whitmore Consulting under the guise of personal restructuring, but the whispers told a different story: investors pulling out, lawsuits circling, and a scandal that refused to stay buried. His name, once glossy and clean, now carried the stain of collusion and cowardice. He tried once more to contact Kiera, this time through a mutual acquaintance, begging for a chance to explain. She declined with a quiet nod and no further comment. Forgiveness, she knew, was not always about conversation. It was about choosing peace over poison. Leonard Westwood, as always, remained steady. Since the night of Taylor's arrest, he had become less of a distant CEO and more of a constant companion, not with grand gestures or whispered confessions, but with presence. He showed up. He stayed late when she worked too long, sent books he knew she would love, and brought pastries from that tiny French bakery she once mentioned in passing. He never asked for her time. He simply made space for it, and over time, Kiera let him in. Their bond grew like ivy, quiet, resilient, impossible to ignore. It was during one of those quiet evenings tucked in the rooftop garden of Leonard's penthouse, with a glass of wine and the stars stretching endlessly above them, that he finally spoke. "You've spent so long surviving," he said. "I wonder if you remember how to dream?" Kiera looked up, surprised not by the question, but by how much it ached. "I think I forgot," she admitted. "Or maybe I just didn't think I had permission anymore." Leonard took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her skin. "Then let's give you that permission back." The following month, Kiera launched her own venture, the Amari Initiative, a foundation dedicated to empowering women navigating corporate betrayal, legal injustices, and career rehabilitation. It offered legal counsel, emotional support, and financial literacy, all rooted in the belief that survival should not be a woman's greatest achievement. Leonard invested quietly, insisting on anonymity, but Kiera knew. So did the women who walked through her doors and found not only support, but a blueprint for rising from the ruins. Media outlets, once starved for every headline about her downfall, now buzzed with stories of her rebirth. Interviews, panel invitations, and speaking engagements poured in. Kiera chose carefully, never chasing attention, only accepting platforms that aligned with her purpose. One interview went viral after she was asked what she would say to the people who tried to destroy her. Her answer was simple: "Thank you, because without them, I wouldn't have become this version of me." The internet called it graceful. Her followers called it divine. Amid the noise, she didn't forget to live. She traveled, first alone, then with Leonard, rediscovering the corners of the world she had once dreamed of seeing. In Florence, she learned to cook. In Kyoto, she hiked silent trails lit by lanterns. In Morocco, she danced barefoot under the stars. And when she came home, it was with sand still clinging to her sandals and laughter tucked into the lines of her face. Life had returned, not in a torrent, but in gentle, persistent waves. Her health, once a looming shadow, stabilized under a new treatment regimen. There were good days and difficult ones, but she faced each with grace, armed not with false optimism, but with unwavering will. She no longer feared the ticking clock. She honored it. Every moment was a thread in the tapestry she was still weaving, and she had no intention of leaving it unfinished. On the anniversary of her foundation's launch, Kiera stood before a crowded auditorium, accepting an award for social impact leadership. As she looked out into the sea of faces, survivors, supporters, students, she saw not strangers, but echoes of who she once was. Her voice, when it rose to speak, carried not just strength, but softness. "I used to think I was broken beyond repair," she said, "but sometimes being broken is how the light gets in. And now I shine because I survived." In the front row, Leonard stood, hands clasped, eyes steady on hers. He had never tried to outshine her, never sought to be her savior, only her witness. Later that night, as they danced beneath string lights and laughter, he whispered, "You don't have to be strong all the time." Kiera smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I know, but it's nice to know I have someone to be soft with." The darkness that once tried to claim her was now just a distant echo, a chapter closed but not forgotten. Kiera Amari had not only survived the fire, she had become the spark that lit 1,000 others. And as the music swelled, as the stars blinked down in silent applause, she knew the truth she had fought so hard to reclaim. She was no longer defined by what tried to end her. She was defined by everything she had chosen to become, and she had only just begun. The world remembered Kiera Amari for her fire, her clarity, and the storm she survived. But for Ava and Elias Westwood, her children with Leonard, she was simply Mom, the woman who taught them to speak the truth even when their voices trembled, to stand when the ground shook beneath them, and to choose compassion without sacrificing strength. Growing up under the legacy of a mother forged in betrayal and a father shaped by discipline and vision, they inherited more than wealth. They inherited a compass calibrated by justice. Ava, the elder by 3 minutes, was a storm in still water. With her mother's fierce eyes and her father's calculated patience, she became the natural heir to the Amari Initiative by the time she was in her late 20s. But she didn't simply continue her mother's foundation, she transformed it. Under Ava, the initiative expanded globally, opening satellite programs in South Africa, Brazil, and South Korea. She incorporated AI-driven legal assistance for victims who couldn't afford counsel and launched emergency cryptocurrency funds for women trying to escape domestic financial abuse. Her leadership style was magnetic yet firm, and the media often called her the quiet flame for how she ignited change without ever raising her voice. Elias, on the other hand, took a different path, one that surprised everyone but his mother. Where Ava leaned into advocacy, Elias looked toward innovation. By 23, he had co-founded a tech firm focused on data privacy and ethical surveillance, inspired in part by the way his mother had once been watched, followed, and hunted. His company quickly partnered with international organizations and NGOs to build security systems that protected women activists and whistleblowers across the globe. Unlike his sister, Elias avoided the spotlight, preferring to work behind firewalls and code. but his fingerprints were on almost every major humanitarian cybersecurity breakthrough of the decade. Together, they formed a quiet alliance, not always aligned in method, but always united in mission. They had different strengths, different styles, but one core belief: the world should never again be allowed to chew up and discard people like their mother. Kiera, now semi-retired but still a fierce force in strategy rooms, often said, "My children don't walk in my footsteps. They leap beyond them." And she meant it. Watching them build upon her journey, shaping a world more just than the one she inherited, filled her with the kind of pride that no award, no article, no headline ever could. Despite their legacy, Ava and Elias were not untouched by challenge. They faced backlash, coated in racism, sexism, and the quiet jealousy that follows brilliance born of fire. Commentators often questioned whether they'd have risen so far without the Westwood name, ignoring the relentless work behind each decision they made. But they weathered it with grace, refusing to be diminished. Ava once addressed it at a conference with a line that went viral overnight. "Our privilege isn't in our name. It's in the fact that we know who we are and where we come from." At a gala honoring the 15th anniversary of the Amari Initiative, Kiera stood beside Leonard, now grayer, slower, but just as present. They watched as Ava accepted the Visionary Leadership Award, while Elias live-streamed the event with an encrypted overlay, ensuring privacy and safety for international partners. The applause that followed wasn't just for achievement, it was for continuity, for legacy, for light passed down through resilience. Later that night, Kiera sat in the garden where she had once whispered secrets to herself under the stars. Ava joined her, slipping off her heels and resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder if you changed too much?" Ava asked quietly. "If the storm made you someone you weren't supposed to be?" Kiera smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "No, I became who I needed to be, and because of that, you get to become who you choose to be." In that moment, 3 generations of strength, the pain of the past, the peace of the present, and the promise of the future, breathed in the same quiet space. Ava and Elias didn't just carry the legacy of Kiera and Leonard. They redefined it. They proved that triumph wasn't just survival. It was what you built in the silence that followed. And through them, the fire never died. It simply changed hands. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey through Kiera Amari's rise from betrayal to triumph. What part of her story moved you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters. If this story inspired you or made you think differently about strength, justice, or resilience, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. More powerful stories are on the way, and we can't wait to experience them with you. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and we'll see you in the next episode.